Okay, hi. Welcome to the archives. I hope the volume is working this time. Okay, so this is part two of Sister to Sister 10-year anniversary, keeping it real. And this this post, I'm sharing why I created Sister to Sister series, um, what was explored each week, and why. So I wrote. Let me read to you what I wrote. Okay. At the time, again, this was 10 years ago, I wrote, I know that one size fits all models have not worked for many of my sisters in my community. Too often, I have been in crisis situations with young women who have sat in HIV prevention workshops, are assumed to know the information and be able to retain it. However, much like our education system, the way in which the information was being presented did not speak to these women. It did not allow them to critically question how racism impacts their decision making and how constructions of identity are political, but often left out of learning spaces on purpose. And so, in acknowledging that no education system is neutral, that all knowledge is socially constructed and thus contested, I went in with the understanding that Sister to Sister would not be without its imperfections. However, I was determined to make it as anti racist as possible. So, Sister to Sister Keeping It Real series was a discussion that allowed young ACB women between the ages of 16 to 29 the opportunity to engage in conversations of sexual health by tapping into Indigenous ways of knowing and through arts based interventions. So, just as a side note, I saw earlier on that Black Americans, African Americans, were complaining about BIPOC. Why is the computer shaking? They don't like that Black, Indigenous, people of color. Canadians, we love acronyms. So if you guys don't like this one, I mean, this is what the terms that we used at the time when I was working. ACB, I know a lot of people also don't really like that, but it encapsulated African, Caribbean, and Black. And so we just say Black now. But at the time, it was ACB was like the huge catch term. Now it's BIPOC. So if I say ACB, it's just because I'm literally cutting and pasting from the paper that I wrote at the time, which was the language we used then. Okay. So again, the workshop sessions were bi-weekly. They were held from June 11th until August the 21st. No, August the 20th. Oh, it was like 2011? Oh, I thought it was 2012. Well, that defeats the whole 10-year anniversary purpose. I never get my dates right. I just never get dates right. It was 2011? Oh, damn. Damn. This is why people think I lie. I thought it was 2012. Anyways, I cut and paste from this paper that I wrote, and the dates that this paper says is June 11th to August 20th of 2011. Yikes. So it's actually 11-year anniversary. Regardless, I'm going to big up myself right now. Period. So they were held on Saturdays between 1 and 4 p.m. and close to 142 women attended. I don't know if it was 2011 or 2012. You guys can fact check and let me know if I made that up or not. But here we are. The series was organized with anti-racist principles from the very beginning. The sessions allowed the participants to get HIV education through poetry, theater, music, painting, visual aids, short clips, storytelling, and more. We discussed HIV education, STI education. We interrogated constructions of the criminalized HIV body. We talked specifically around Black women. We talked about the social determinants of health around race, gender, class, constructions of Black female bodies. We talked about power imbalances, economic dependency, and testing and resources. So in week one, it was called HIV Keeping It Real. Let's talk about sex. So that first session was awareness around three questions. One, what is HIV? Two is how is it transmitted? And three, how can we prevent it? The participants were asked to brainstorm their answers to these three questions through painting. So I asked them to limit the amount of writing. I didn't want to be like HIV is, I wanted them to draw. So instead of writing it, I wanted them to use their creativity to draw the different images to answer those questions. So some of them drew needles, some of them drew like, how do you prevent it? They drew condoms. Some of them did, what is HIV? They drew like the red ribbon. They drew cells, etc. And so as they painted, I had two community members that were brought in to the room, and they were playing the keyboard and serenading them because I wanted the element of music, right? Music is really important, especially when you're learning. And so I wanted to have folks who were musicians come in and play music as the participants were drawing their answers to these questions. Um, we also then had another community member, one of my colleagues came in as an elder. They weren't obviously an elder, but I like the idea within African communities of, the elder that's sitting down and the grandkids or the village sits at the feet of the elder and they're listening to that story, that kind of an imagery. That's what I wanted as well too. So we had an HIV positive person come in to debunk a lot of the myths, right? Because often if you don't know folks, you assume all sorts of, you internalize a lot of stigma and discrimination. We create stories about people and who and what they are. And so I wanted to have somebody in the community who was HIV positive come and share their experiences and debunk some of these stigmas and myths. And so this can be really tricky because it borders on tokenism, objectification, and at times even trauma porn. So it's a really slippery slope, right? You don't want people to just come in and be like, here's my story of how everybody was paid that participated. That was something that I made sure all facilitators who came in, they were paid. Although I wonder if they were, I think this one was really sticky. Because technically they were a coworker and I had to advocate for them to still get paid. Anyways, it was a whole thing. So our guest was relatable. They were engaging. They ended up staying to watch. We watched MTV Sugar episode 2, and the MTV Sugar, that one was based in Nairobi, Kenya. So we watched episode 2, and then we critically analyzed the show. We opened the floor to discussions. We reflected on what we had just watched. We talked about the themes that showed up. We talked about the complications of negotiating condom use, the importance of prevention, and how the characters, and specifically Kenyans and Africans, were represented. All the participants were given contact information to therapists at our center if they needed it. We also had counselors that were available on hand in case anybody had to, speak to somebody and get some support. I had ordered a popcorn machine, one of those old school popcorn machines, just to be able to pop fresh kernels for the participants. We ordered all the food every week. It was all catered by local women in the community who catered the food. I also had a friend at the time who was a baker, and so I had her bake some food, some cupcakes and cakes and stuff for us for the last session. And so again, all of these decisions obviously come into it, right? You want it to be as community led as possible. You want it to be as Black owned business as possible. These were some of the decisions. I'll talk more about that in the next session. So week 2 was called What's the 411 on STIs. We had a community member, an educator. They came in to teach us about the reproductive anatomy. Again, even still, I get confused about the anatomy, right? So they talk about the anatomy, what are the different STIs, how do they affect the body. And what we did with this one, it was really hands-on and interactive. And so the presenter allowed the participants to draw. They used different ingredients like bananas, Twizzlers, lemons, all sorts of different kinds of candies. And then they had to construct a replica of the different types of reproductive anatomy. And I felt the presenter did an amazing job. I'll share some of the pictures. I'll use the pictures as the image for the blog so you can see what they look like. But it was a really fun session. It allowed them to engage and play. It allowed them to be creative. They use their textile motor skills. So again, we're using multiple ways of learning, right? So this was hands-on. We learned about the body. We learned about STIs, but we did so without shame or anxiety or none of the stigma. Then after that, it was a little bit of a heavier topic. So it was a focus group. And so the focus group was on sexual violence, and it was really powerful. It was really deep, and it was surprisingly vulnerable. We had a consultant so my mentor at the time came in to do the focus group, and so it was a lot. Again, we had therapists and counselors on hand in case anybody needed it. But it was a powerful session. So week 3 was called HIV and the Law, to tell or not to tell. And this one was another difficult conversation, given at the time that HIV non-disclosure was criminalized under manslaughter and aggravated sexual assault. And so I invited one of my friends at the time who was a writer and poet. And so she came in and um, facilitated a poetry-based activity where they had to write a sonnet, I believe. They wrote sonnets um, or a haiku, one of the two. They wrote a poem around putting themselves in someone else's shoes, right? And so after that, after the poem, we watched a clip from Limiting the Law, Silence, Sex, and Science, which was a clip from the HIV Legal Clinic. No, the HIV Legal Network. And so that session was all around HIV criminalization and the law. So week 4 was called Money, Sex, and Choices, and that was part 1. And so the session discussed social determinants of HIV. We had an interactive activity and images. So one of the peer educators came in. Sorry, hold on. Before, I think in week 3 we also did theater, theater of the oppressed. I think we acted out some scenarios as well too. We had theater. I think week 3 was theater. Anyway, so going back to week 4, we had I had invited one of the peer educators to come in and do a presentation, which looked at education, the judicial, religious systems, and the media. And so that was a good opportunity to give the peer educator an opportunity to present. Following that, we also had a grassroots activist and workshops presenters that came in, and they did a workshop called Analyzing Black Female Sexuality. And that presentation was really good as well too. So it went through some of the different stereotypes and archetypes that Black women are constructed as, and like how it impacts us. We ended with a discussion on how social media can be used for good. And so when asked about it, like in terms of feedback, they responded that it gave them hope for change. They enjoy people's stories, and they liked that they needed to stop being the superwoman. So they really that was one of the lessons that drove home to some of them, was that they need to stop being superwomen, and healing took place. And so week 5 was Money, Sex, and Choices Part 2. And so in that workshop, we invited a community member to come in um, and do a photo exhibit. So this was a photo exhibit. We had them come in. They were working on with young women in their community in the Jane and Finch region. And so they came, we put some of the photos up. And so it was a photo exhibit. Participants explore themes around like the complexities of transactional sex and relationships. We talk about sugar daddies and boopsies. We talk about the dynamics between Africans and Caribbean men. Who pays more, who wants more. Um, she taught us about the social determinants of health that underscored these decisions. We had a photographer come in that week as well too to take photos of the actual sessions as they were interacting with the art. And then later we watched another MTV Ignite episode. This time it was based in Trinidad. It was called Tribes, which again looked at themes of transactional sex. And so earlier we had Kenya. I wanted to also give the Caribbean representation. And so we watched MTV Ignite and looked at Trinidad. And then week 6 was called Let's Talk About Testing. So this was the final week. It was more of a celebration and evaluation more than anything. We watched a short clip called Me, Myself, and HIV on YouTube. And it was just around 2 young folks who are HIV positive and how they're navigating life. I think one was in an African young man, and one was a white woman from the United States. And so they talked about living their lives in intimate relationships during heterosexual relationships. But they were talking about how they navigated their relationships and dating as HIV positive people. You can watch that clip online still. So I created a sexual health Jeopardy game. And so we played sexual health Jeopardy just to kind of, I wanted the session to be a recap. So you've had 5 sessions. What information did you retain? But rather than like a pop quiz, we did it as Jeopardy, which was a lot of fun as well too. And then I had canvases for them so they can paint. And so I bought paint and I had canvases and I asked them to think about the session, the series that they just partaken in the last 6 weeks, and to summarize what their feedback was in art. So they had to do a painting to kind of summarize how they felt about the summary. So some people, I think one was like there was mountains. There was another one that was like a person with like 2 heads and it was like positive and negative. There's 3 canvases they had, and so yeah, they got to paint at the end. There's music. I had a resource table. There was prizes. We ordered pizza. I bought some sex toys to give away as prizes. We had condoms. We had dental dams. Lube was available. They got an educational session on how to use the preventative technologies, and so we did a presentation on like how to use condoms, how to use dental dams, and then they enjoyed desserts from a local Black women-owned business. Um, yeah, so that was the final session. When asked would they attend another series, some of them said for sure. Others said there was nothing that they didn't like. It was really good. And so, yeah, that was Sister to Sister, basically the 6 week series. This is 16 minutes, so I'm going to cut it short. The next and final post, I'll just share some of the why I made some of the decisions that I made and the lessons that were learned, as well as feedback from the participants. So stay tuned. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And until next time, in solidarity.